PhD students kept saying they needed. So therefore, I ended up, when I finally had a study leave, writing this book, which encompasses my experience of doing theology with photographs, both doing theology for the sake of theological research, but also in ministry practice. So it encompasses both of those aspects of doing theology. So there we go, book plug over. So back to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I think doing theology entails. And first, I wanted to say that theology, I think, is a bit like a verb rather than a noun. It's embedded in reflection, and it's an action. It's like something ongoing, something we're doing. So it's like theologizing or theologing. And I think it's meaning making through the lens of faith. So I'm defining theology very broadly here. And I don't think that theology should be limited to things we read in books or a carefully crafted sermon or even a dodgy one that someone's banged out. But I think theology is lived out in people's everyday lives. So, and that means that anyone, absolutely anyone, can be a theologian. And my work has, over the years, has aimed to include people from a variety of backgrounds, abilities, and perspectives, to give lots of different people a voice about the theology we do, and to give them different ways of articulating that if words might not be their strong point. And I'll give examples of that really soon. So there are three ways, I think, of making sense of what theology is. And so the first one is affective knowing. And Audrey, that's the first kind of bullet point on the slide. Yeah, there we go. So, and what I mean by this is that we know things in different ways, right? And we can know things cognitively. So we learn something, we read it, we think it, and then we know it, right? Or we see something happen, we make sense of what we saw, and then we can remember it, and then we know it. And that's a very cognitive approach and how we often think about knowing. But we know things in other ways too. So this is called affective knowing. And it's about knowledge that comes through intuition. So we sense the truth of a matter, or we feel it in our heart before our rational mind has made sense of it. And there are scholars who even argue that, in fact, most of our knowing is affective, but some people are quicker at like explaining it rationally than others. And that the intuition comes first all the time. Now, I don't know how they can prove that, but it's an interesting theory. So now James K.A. Smith charts a theology of the human person and says that humans are not primarily thinking things or even believing things, but rather imaginative, desiring animals who are defined fundamentally by love. We are embodied, affective creatures who are shaped and primed by material practices or liturgies that aim our hearts to certain ends, which in turn draws to them in a way that transforms our actions by inscribing in us habits or dispositions to act in certain ways. So he sees us as fundamentally beings who act on our intuition. And here he's making the case for how worship functions within the lived experiences of people of faith. saying worship is sensed rather than cognitive. But I think what's interesting is his view of people as affective creatures, he calls them, and people with imaginations, not primarily thinking beings. And along these lines, Amos Young wrote about communicating faith essentials with people with Down syndrome. And he observed, human knowing of God is mediated through formation, imitation, affectivity, intuition, imagination, interiorization, and symbolic engagement. Thus, rather than propositions constituting the best form of catechis, perhaps images, metaphors, paradoxes, humor, ritual, and stories, mediated by a diversity of approaches, such as music, artistic media, and modeling, may be better. So, if acts of devotion, so what Smith is arguing, and faith acquisition, what Young is arguing, are responses to what is felt and sensed, then theologies can equally emerge from these sources fueled by the imagination. So that's some of the scholarly background around what I'm arguing. Yeah, so now we move on to a work of the imagination. Now, scholars have called this the pastoral imagination or the prophetic imagination. And I call this maybe the theological imagination. And I mean, essentially what I'm talking about, the intuitive sense of the divine that emerges through the curiosity that we might have about what could be, rather than a direct experience of what is. And imagination is really key to meaning making. It helps us to take our intuitive, affective sense of things and relate them to ideas and images and allow those to emerge and take shape. And unlike reason thinking, the imagination may be working subconsciously, working out possibilities and connections in the midst of our other activities. And, the Bible works this way. So there are text-based metaphors all throughout the Bible to describe spiritual truths. So we hear Jesus say, the kingdom of heaven is like, and he might talk about, someone scattering seed. And when he talks about that, we can picture a person tossing seeds into the ground, and we see this image in our mind's eye. And we can smell the earth, maybe feel the hard pods of seeds in our hands, and imagine the sound of seeds thudding into rich soil or pinging as they bounce along the hard path. And this brings us into the very kind of quite human embodied place, which opens up a way of seeing our ministry in this light. So I think embracing affective knowing then fuels our imagination of what's possible and leads us into my third point, which is theological reflection. Yeah, so the ability to be theologically reflecting. And this is our way of harnessing life's experiences and our spiritualities in order to do theology. And I think theological reflection happens in an intentional way sometimes. And in fact, I teach theological reflection at Ridley Hall. So that's very highly intentional. But of course, theological reflection is also intuitive. It's the meaning making that happens in response to our life experiences and curiosities. And I think that this is a core aspect of discipleship and spiritual growth. So it's the learning that happens whilst people make sense of their experiences in light of faith. And that informs how someone responds in new situations with new experiencing. And this reflection is theological when it is faith-seeking understanding, so that the eyes of faith are applied to the process of meaning-making. So what I mean and now I'm kind of going into pedagogical theory a bit here, but I mean, instead of asking questions like, oh, what should I do? We could ask, how might God see this situation? Or how has my tradition informed other people with these experiences? And what have I learned about God? So it kind of moves the learning into the faith zone of reality. And this, I argue, becomes a way of doing theology. Right, let's move on to how do photographs help with this? And so I think that photographs can act as a key conduit for expanding our theology and make better use of this affective knowledge that I have, that we all have. And indeed, it expands the possibilities for our theology. So the idea is that we can have an imagination or a picture of something or be curious about something, but not necessarily have to translate it into words. So sometimes we can communicate it using a photograph, or a photograph helps to articulate something of what we're sensing. So in the photograph, all the photographs here are, well, most of them are ones I have taken or my research participants have taken. And in this one, I went through a period of my life of trying to take photographs of small beads of water, like dewdrops or something similar, in all the various places that I found them. And that was because one time when I was on retreat, I confess, I was desperately praying that God would meet me and show me something of himself. And I'd become so focused on this just deep longing to encounter God that I looked near me. I was sitting outside in a garden, and near me was a bench, and on the bench, because it had just been raining, was a drop of water that was kind of hanging down from a bit of wood. And as I moved near it, I could see the world kind of around me reflected in this tiny little drop. And in that moment, I felt that God was saying, I am already here, and I am with you, and you just need to see me and look for me. And so from there, I proceeded to take lots of photographs, some better than others, of these little drops. But so in a way, so this was my way of kind of articulating theology in a nonverbal way. And so this can help us to understand how we emotionally relate to an experience. And I think that there can be a power in being able to articulate some bit of theology that isn't like intellectually driven, but is still emotionally intelligent or emotionally thoughtful. And so that's kind of one way of kind of coming at our experience. And then second, I think what the photographs can help us do is generate a distance from the situation. So by creating a slightly different relationship with the incident, the image gives us a view from a new angle. So I may have had this moment with the drop of water, and then I walk away, but then later I can look at the photograph and think about it in different ways or experience it in different ways, which gives me a whole nother level of thinking about it. And here I'm kind of referring to Killen and De Beer's approach to theological reflection, as they talk about how working with images and metaphors can take a situation and create kind of like another thing that we then can look at differently, so that if this initial experience was quite emotionally charged, that it's hard to see it or engage with it, when it becomes another thing, it allows us to turn it around in our minds and experience it in different ways. So yeah, it creates a helpful distance. And third, as I've been kind of already saying, but we then transcend words to communicate our theology. And so this means that theology doesn't have to be written in books, but can be seen, gazed upon, and enjoyed. And it means that the people we care about and whose theologies we're interested in also don't have to communicate their theology using words. Now, don't worry. You don't need to be a skilled photographer or have a very expensive camera to use photographs to resource your theology. I do not have the expensive camera, nor am I a photographer. So using your camera phone is really fine, or whatever you want to. So photographs can be used in research and ministry in a variety of ways. So first, photographs that someone else has taken can be used. And in research, this can look like a historical archive that can be used for photo elicitation. So what I mean is, you can come to an interview and with a whole host of photographs, like, I don't know, 30 photographs, 40, 50, I don't know, and lay them out on a table and ask a research participant or plural participants to choose a photograph. So it could be anything. It could be photographs of a church building. It could be historical photographs of a geographical area. And you ask people to choose something that makes them hopeful, or choose something that makes them feel peaceful, or choose something that makes them feel sad, or something like this. And then the idea is that the person doesn't think in their mind, oh, what am I hopeful about? And then tries to find a picture to match it. Instead, the idea is you encourage people to just like let their eyes gaze at the photographs and allow the answer to your question emerge as they look at the photos. So it's driven by the images. And this is a form of mindfulness. Yeah. So, and this can work well with an exhibition or maybe a book of photography, or it can be, there are images that were designed for contemplation, that were designed for ministry, evangelism, and so all different collections of photographs can be used like this. And I found it very generative in ministry, but also very generative in research, and in teaching. Yeah. So, so that's working with like an archive of photographs. Second is that when the participants provide the photographs, so This could be their own photo albums, of course, their photo stream, which is what people have more often these days. I studied students a few years ago, well, quite a few years ago now, about 20 years ago. I studied Ukrainian students in Kiev, and I asked them to talk about the images on their walls in their student accommodation. So that was their way of providing some kind of images that related to their how they wanted to portray themselves. I was playing with ideas around identity and spirituality as I talked to them about that. But yeah, there are all different ways of inviting people to share something of their own photos. Like within Ignatian spirituality, it's not unusual to invite someone to create a spiritual life map. And I found some of my students found it really helpful to go through their photo stream and choose key photos from their life that are in their photo stream as a way of mapping their life. I am too old to have my entire life on a photo stream, but it's great that they do. So there we go. Yeah, and so then the third point is that I can get people, my participants, to take photographs. Now, this is sometimes called photo voice. And it can be something like a project where you invite people to just take photographs of what is significant to you. And then if this is a research project, you interview them about why they took those photos. And I would ask them, so bring 10 photos to the interview, and then choose, one or two that are most significant to you, and then tell me why it's significant. Give it a title and explain what it means. So in that way, the person is narrating the photography that they've done, which makes it quite different from art. It's not pure art in just kind of looking at a photograph someone took, but it's the person who took it is investing it in significance, which feels important to me and empowering of the people I'm listening to. This within ministry, we can do this. It's kind of like could be contemplative photography too, which I can say more about later. But then the fourth is essentially something like a photo documentary approach, which involves taking photographs and looking at them. So something that we call a vicinity walk, where you might walk around an area and just take photographs of what you see, and then come back and talk about what you learned about your environment. So there's also, this can be contemplative as well, inviting God to draw your curiosity to something and then sitting and waiting until the photo kind of emerges in your mind and then taking the photo. And this can be a way of practicing presence, being really present in the moment, in the holy now. And this can be kind of sold to people as a photography project. So I worked with young people for many years. So if I told them we were doing contemplative photography, they would have run a mile. But telling them we're doing a photography project was often more compelling. Anyway, so now I wanted to just share a few examples from my own work about the advantages that I think can come from using photographs. So I did a project to study the religious beliefs of young Polish migrants to the UK. And I was this was this was about 15 years ago, when there was a large influx of young people coming from Eastern and Central Europe to work. And I was really keen that these young Polish people were heard, that their voices were heard, because there was a lot of people saying things about them. And the conversations were kind of happening up here, but I wanted to know what they thought and what was happening for them. So I hosted a free photography workshop, and I then from that invited everyone who came to participate. And I had advertised this through the Polish Catholic congregation and through the local Polish cake shop. Uh, and we had some lovely cake at the workshop. And then, and I ran several of these workshops to generate things. And I worked with a Polish photographer, and he gave like the photography kind of tips and learning points. And then I was there to smile, hand out cake, and invite people to take part in my project. And most of them did. And I asked them to take 10 photographs of what was sacred to them. And then I interviewed them about it. And I had a few unexpected discoveries. And I'm not going to say them all right now because there's not time. But one of them that's relevant to the topic today is that I was able to see the city where we were all living through their eyes, because they took the photographs and they saw the city through a Polish Catholic lens. So what you're looking at now is this, it's actually a fairly small statue of Mary that had washed ashore from a shipwreck off of the coast of the city, and it had been put on the wall. And one of the participants took a photograph of this. So, and then the next one is a statue of Mary holding a lighthouse, which is kind of iconic of the city. And you can't tell from this photo, but she's looking out to sea. And this is just, it is like a life-size statue, but it's at the kind of the back of a care home. And most people would never walk past this or see this statue. And the participants said that this was highly sacred to him because it was about how Mary protects him in times of uncertainty. So here's another one, which is of a church that had been bombed during the Second World War and had been left not restored as like a memorial to all the damage that happened in this city during the Second War. And it's in the middle of a very busy roundabout. So to take this photograph, my young Polish man would have taken his life into his hands getting across the motorway. But for him, this illustrated what was sacred, because it was like the lack of what was sacred. Because for him to leave a church building in this ruinous state was like sacrilegious. And it felt wrong to him within his his Polish Catholic lens. This just felt not right. That was interesting. And then the last one was this picture of an angel and with a broken wing, and a young person talked about how within her Polish Catholic belief, there's this idea that every person has an angel. And for her, she felt like having left Poland, she was so far from the practice of faith that that her angel was broken, like her spiritual connection was broken. So So that was that project. And that was, can you go back just, Audrey, first before we get distracted by the triumphal entry? Yeah, thank you. Don't worry. um, but yeah, so that was how I just suddenly was able to catch a glimpse of the city I lived in a completely new way, thanks to this project. So, and this other idea was that you can invite people to create, it's called like Bible tableaus. And you essentially read a bit of scripture and then invite people to recreate the scene so that you can photograph it. Yes, so here we are. So, Dennis Morris, who was a photographer who toured with the Sex Pistols and is known for his famous photographs of Bob Marley, was commissioned to work with a youth group in London to explore the Easter story together. And they produced an exhibition called Easter Images. And I just wanted to show you 4 of these images. So here's the triumphal entry. Then the next one is Gethsemane. Then the young people depicted the crucifixion. And then they did the resurrection. It seems to me that from reading what the youth worker and the vicar of the church where this was based worked, that the photography enabled the young people to translate the story of Easter from the Bible into the story of their own lives. And the photography project had a real high ministry value because of the experience people had while doing it, but also another outcome is these amazing photographs that can then be used with other youth groups to think through the story of the Passion. So, in the interest of time, Audrey, let's skip the next 2 slides, I think. I just wanted to talk just briefly about Visio Divina as a ministry tool. And this has been written about in a book called Letting Photos Speak. Recently written about it. It's been written about many times. But this book, Letting Photos Speak, is particularly delightful because it's all about how photographs can resource contemplative practice and what they call mindful photography. And what they say is, within mindful photography, we leave our camera in its bag or our pocket until we feel a connection with wherever we are. That connection arises by noticing and becoming aware of our physical surroundings and our emotions. And once that happens, the wonder of the present opens up before us. Mindful photography is open to mystery and surprise, never knowing what each moment will hold. It is a genre of photography which is free from judgment. The idea that a picture can be good or bad and filled with wonder and revelation. So, and one of the helpful things that Steve Radley, who's one of the authors of that book, talks about is that the way people tend to use their cameras now, especially their camera phones, is they kind of see something, they then snap a photo of it, and then move on. Whereas he says people can be encouraged to just be a little bit more mindful or a little bit more curious by adding a step. So you see something and then you pause and you look at it and you are curious about it and you say to God, God, why am I noticing this? And then after practicing presence in that way, then snap. So instead of see snap, it becomes see pause snap. So anyway, I thought that was quite helpful and fun. So for the last slide that we're on, why do theology with photographs, or even spirituality with photographs? I think it's honest, because affective knowing is already how we do theology. And I think this is a helpful kind of solution to a lot of the overly rational theology that buzzes around, which has, I'm not saying it's not valuable, but I think it's good to listen to all kinds of theology from all kinds of people. So, second, it is inclusive of all sorts of people as theological knowers, which I've said, and it helps us to practice presence, to stop and experience the now, which is what I've been talking about with contemplative photography. And we have a tool in our pocket already, many of us, on our phones. So it's something that's readily available to us. And then finally, it is embodied. It helps to take account of the landscape that people inhabit, making sure that the theology is fully contextual. So that's all from me for now.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, I think we might be slightly over time, but I think we should still take our 5-minute break, and then we'll look at Q&A after that. Please, if you want to take the break to type in your questions, you can do that, and I will read them out. If you can't use the Q&A function, some people have said over the course of the conference that they have some issues with it, then you should be able to type into the chat function. So we will be monitoring both, and we will take your questions. So can we be back at 25 to 4, please? So 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, welcome back. I hope that everyone had a good break. I don't really see any questions. So I am wondering whether, Sarah, you might want to use a bit of time. We can finish early, but I thought you might want to talk through the 2 slides that we skipped through. Is that all right? I will share the screen again, and we can just see. Oops, doesn't seem to be. Hold on, see if I can get it back to that particular slide. Here we go. So I think I can share this now. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so this was one of my students. Before he came to train for Anglican ministry, he was a professional portrait photographer, and he'd come to realize that taking a photo of someone was a really compelling way of getting to know them better. But he was also aware that the photographer's gaze on someone shaped how that person was depicted. So he decided to shift the balance by asking lots of people to take photographs of him, some of them complete strangers, some people he, kind of knew, and some people who knew him really well. And what he did was he would say, here's my camera, here's how to, work it, press this button, take a photo of me, and compose it exactly the way you want to. So where do you want me to stand? How do you want to frame it? And take it according to what you see in me. And then he would ask them to, after they took the photo, to write down what they saw in him. And he was able to keep a record of what people saw in him. It's kind of written on the side of the photographs in that slide that you probably can't read. But he created this collage of 45 portraits, and he called it I Am Who You Say I Am. And it came to be a way of really deep reflection for him on his own identity and his sources of identity. And one of the biggest surprises he had was how perfect strangers observed really interesting and insightful things about him. But he also found this was a profoundly more spiritual activity than he'd ever imagined. I think partly because of the releasing power into the hands of others. And anyway, it was quite interesting. But he wrote a poem about it. And in the next slide is an excerpt from that poetry. He says, "Beloved, not learning to love myself, there are too many doubts, but listening for the still small voice, a gift, subtle, surprising, disarming, opaque, being attentive to the whisper of grace, the echoes of love. I am who you say I am." Yeah. So I see that there is a question. Shall I answer? Well, try to answer that. Yeah. The question says, do you think that video clips can be used as effectively as photos? Well, it's that word effectively that is the key. Yes, of course, video clips can be used in really similar ways as photos. However, the problem is, that working with video can generate an awful lot of material. And so sometimes it's hard to narrow it down to the bit that you would like someone to see. So not all of the techniques that I talked about or that I recount in my book would work. They don't translate straight into videos, but that doesn't mean that it's not a great medium to use and to explore. So by all means, have a go and see what happens and let us all know what you discover.
Okay, last chance to ask a question. If there are no further questions, oh, there's a comment. The comment says, I love the idea of photographs being able to express spirituality. How do you think this could be used more widely in the church context?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. There are different ways. So there's an article I wrote with another person called Answers on a Postcard, and we worked with like a deanery within a group that had to write a mission action plan, and we worked with a whole load of postcards and asked people to choose a postcard that spoke to them about where they hoped mission in that area would be in 5 years, and we asked like several different questions. So we recount how we did that there. There's other things like church closure. So a pastor asked people to take photographs of their favorite parts of the church just before that church building closed and merged with another congregation. And it became a real way to more embrace the mourning and bereavement of church closure, but also to kind of celebrate what was good about it. And those photographs are now exhibited in the new building. So there's something of that journey that is reflected in the new place. So yeah, there are lots of different ways to play with that. Yeah, I love your idea. I'd love to explore that more and to hear your thoughts.
Any more questions? If there are no more questions, we could end about 5 minutes early. Hazel says thank you. And thank you very much, Sarah. I think maybe for me, I think I don't have that many questions just because maybe that is part of the nature of this talk, which is to contemplate and reflect. And I think personally, I've been in faith traditions that are quite reactive and very quickly reactive, and acting on a lot of assumptions. And I think your method of just being able to sit with a picture or stop to take a picture and then think about it, that's actually such a great way to slow down in your body as well, and slow down your kind of the active thoughts that people have. And then you get much deeper reflection on what's going on or the feelings that you're having. So thank you very much. I see in the chat just lots of thank yous, and I think you can read them for yourself too, Sarah. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So were you saying that is video divina or something? Instead of lectio divina, we're having a different kind of picture-oriented practice, reflection. So I think, yeah, thank you so much. All right, we are finishing slightly early, and the next session starts at 4:15 with 2 short papers. So you're free to have a break and come back on then. Thank you, everyone.